The dust from the mare's hooves had barely settled when Dolores Barrett saw the stranger dismount at her gate, his weathered hands already reaching for the coil of rope slung over his saddle horn. It was the spring of 1873 in Fort Worth, Texas, and she had grown accustomed to men passing through her property on their way to somewhere else. But this one paused, tipped his hat toward where her 8-year-old daughter Emma stood watching the cattle in the near pasture, and called out in a voice that carried clear across the yard. "That your girl there, madam. She looks like she could use some proper instruction with a lariat." Dolores straightened from where she had been kneeling in her vegetable garden, dirt under her fingernails and sweat dampening the collar of her cotton dress despite the morning hour. She had been a widow for 2 years now, ever since cholera had taken Robert during that terrible summer of 1871. And in those 2 years, she had learned to be suspicious of strange men offering help. But something about this cowboy's tone lacked the predatory edge she had learned to detect. He sounded genuinely concerned, the way a teacher might sound when spotting a student struggling with their letters. "My daughter does just fine on her own," Dolores called back, rising to her feet and brushing the dirt from her skirt. The sun was climbing higher now, promising another hot Texas day, and she shielded her eyes to get a better look at him. He was tall and lean in the way men who spent their lives in the saddle became, with sun-darkened skin, and hair the color of prairie wheat showing beneath his dusty brown hat. She guessed him to be somewhere in his early 30s, maybe 32 or 33, which would make him only a handful of years older than her own 28. "I mean no offense, madam," he said, and she noticed he kept his distance, staying on his side of the fence like a gentleman. "But I just watched her try to rope that fence post 3 times, and her loop keeps collapsing before it reaches the target. That is a fixable problem with about 10 minutes of proper teaching, if you would permit it." Emma had turned now, her small face flushed with embarrassment at having been observed in her failures. She clutched her practice rope, one of the old lariats that had belonged to her father, and Dolores felt her heart squeeze at the sight. The girl had been trying so hard these past months to learn the skills her father would have taught her, working from dawn until dusk to help keep their small ranch running. They had 20 head of cattle, a few chickens, 2 horses, and this plot of land that Robert had claimed and built upon with his own hands. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Dolores would be damned if she would lose it just because she was a woman alone. "What is your name, mister?" Dolores asked, taking a few steps closer but maintaining a respectable distance. She could see him more clearly now. His eyes were gray like storm clouds, and there were lines at their corners that spoke of long days squinting into the sun. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and his clothes, though dusty from travel, were well maintained. His horse was a fine-looking buckskin gelding, well fed and properly shod. "Kieran Walsh, madam. I have been working cattle up north of here for the past 5 years, and before that I learned my trade in the Nebraska Territory. I am passing through on my way to meet up with a drive heading to Kansas, but I have got time enough to teach your daughter the basics of throwing a proper loop, if you will allow it." Dolores considered this. Emma needed the instruction, that much was true. The girl had been growing frustrated with her inability to master the rope, and Dolores herself had never learned the skill. Robert had always handled the cattle work, and she had managed the household and the garden. Now she was trying to do both, and there were gaps in her knowledge that no amount of determination could fill. "Emma," Dolores called. "Come here, please." The girl walked over, dragging her rope in the dirt, her light brown braids swinging. She had Robert's blue eyes and Dolores's stubborn chin, and she was at that age where she was all legs and elbows, growing faster than Dolores could let out her dresses. She stopped beside her mother and looked up at Kieran Walsh with a mixture of hope and wariness. "This is Mr. Walsh," Dolores said. "He thinks he can teach you how to throw a rope properly. Would you like that?" Emma nodded, suddenly shy. "Yes, Mama." Kieran smiled, and it transformed his weathered face into something warmer, more approachable. "Well then, Miss Emma, why don't you show me what you have been trying to do, and we will work from there." Dolores found herself walking back toward the house, intending to return to her garden work, but instead she climbed the 3 wooden steps to her porch and sat down in the rocking chair that had once been Robert's favorite spot to watch the sunset. From here, she had a clear view of the yard where Kieran had climbed over the fence with easy grace and was now standing beside Emma, examining her rope. "First thing," she heard him say, his voice carrying in the still morning air, "is that this rope is too long for you. You are a smaller person, so you need a smaller loop to control it properly. Here, let me show you." He demonstrated, his hands working with practiced efficiency as he built a loop and sent it flying toward the fence post Emma had been targeting. The rope sailed through the air and settled perfectly over the post, and Emma gasped with delight. Kieran pulled the rope tight, then loosened it and walked over to retrieve it. "Now, the secret is not in your arm," he said, handing the rope back to Emma. "Most people think it is all about throwing hard, but really it is about the wrist action and the timing. You have got to keep your loop open as long as possible, and you do that by adding a little spin as you release. Watch again." He demonstrated once more, this time in slow motion so Emma could see exactly how his wrist rotated at the moment of release. Then he handed her the rope again. "You try it. Do not worry about reaching the post yet, just practice the motion." Dolores watched as Emma tried, her small face screwed up in concentration. The loop collapsed almost immediately, but Kieran just nodded encouragingly. "That was better already. You got more distance that time. Try again, and this time think about keeping your wrist loose." Stiff wrist means stiff rope. They continued like that for the better part of an hour. Dolores told herself she needed to get back to her garden, but she could not quite bring herself to move from the porch. There was something mesmerizing about watching Kieran work with Emma, the patience he showed, the genuine pleasure he seemed to take in her small improvements. He never showed frustration when she failed, only pointed out what she had done right and what to adjust for next time. "There it is." Kieran suddenly shouted, and Dolores saw that Emma's loop had sailed true and settled around the fence post. The girl started jumping up and down with excitement, and Kieran laughed, a sound that was rich and genuine. "You did it. That was perfect form. Now do it again, and let us see if it was luck or skill." Emma did it again, and though this time the loop only caught the top of the post, it was clear she had grasped the fundamental technique. After a few more successful throws, Kieran showed her how to coil the rope properly so it would not tangle, how to build different sizes of loops for different purposes, and how to maintain the rope so it would last. Finally, he walked back toward the fence, and Dolores realized she should probably go inside before he noticed she had been watching the entire time. But she was not quite fast enough, because he looked up and caught her eye, and she felt an unexpected flush of warmth spread across her cheeks. "Your daughter is a quick learner, madam," Kieran called up to the porch. "She has got good instincts. With practice, she will be able to catch anything on this ranch." "I appreciate your taking the time, Mr. Walsh," Dolores said, rising from the chair. She smoothed her skirt, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look with her hair coming loose from its pins and dirt still smudged on her dress. "Can I offer you some water? Or breakfast? It is the least I can do." Kieran hesitated, and she could see him weighing the propriety of accepting against what was clearly genuine thirst and hunger. Finally, he nodded. "Water would be appreciated, madam, and if it is not too much trouble, I would be grateful for whatever you might spare for breakfast." "I have been riding since before dawn." "Come up to the porch then," Dolores said. "Emma, go draw some fresh water from the well." Emma ran off, still clutching her rope, and Kieran climbed over the fence again and approached the porch. Up close, Dolores could see that her first assessment had been accurate. He was probably in his early 30s, with the kind of solid, capable build that came from years of hard work. His hands were calloused but clean, and when he removed his hat as he climbed the porch steps, she saw that his hair was thick and slightly wavy, in need of a cut but not unkempt. "Please sit," Dolores said, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs on the porch. She went inside and quickly put together a plate of biscuits left over from her own breakfast, along with some bacon and eggs that she reheated on the stove. When she returned, Emma was there with a pitcher of water and 2 cups, pouring for their guest with careful concentration. Kieran accepted the food with genuine gratitude, eating with good manners but obvious hunger. Dolores sat in the other chair, sipping her own water and trying not to stare. It had been so long since a man had sat on this porch, since she had heard a male voice that was not the occasional trader or the ranch hands she sometimes hired for day work when she could afford it. "You have a nice place here," Kieran said between bites. "How much land are you working?" 160 acres, Dolores said. "My husband claimed it in 1868 and we built the house the following year. We have been here ever since." She paused, then added, "I have been here ever since, I mean. Robert passed 2 years ago." Kieran nodded, his expression sympathetic but not pitying. "I am sorry for your loss. It must be difficult managing a ranch on your own." "We manage," Dolores said, and heard the defensiveness in her own voice. She softened her tone. "It is not easy, but we are making it work. Emma helps more than most girls her age would, and I have learned to do things I never thought I could do." "That is clear enough," Kieran said. "Not many women would take on what you have taken on." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Emma having run back to the yard to practice more with her rope. Dolores found herself studying Kieran's profile, the strong line of his nose, the way the morning light caught in his gray eyes. She had not felt this particular flutter of awareness since before Robert had gotten sick, and it unsettled her. She was a widow with a child and a struggling ranch. She had no business noticing how a stranger's hands looked holding a cup of water, or how his voice had a slight rasp to it that was not unpleasant. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Walsh?" she asked, partly to distract herself from her own thoughts. "Nebraska Territory, born and raised," he said. "My father had a small homestead outside of Omaha. I left when I was 18 to learn the cattle trade, and I have been moving around ever since. Worked in Colorado for a while, then down into New Mexico Territory, and now here in Texas." "Do you have family back in Nebraska?" "My parents both passed several years back," Kieran said. "I have got a sister who married and moved to California, but we have not been in touch much. I suppose you could say the other drovers are my family now. We look out for each other on the trail." There was a loneliness in his words that resonated with Dolores's own experience. She understood what it was like to be unmoored, to have lost the people who anchored you to the world. But where she had Emma to keep her grounded, it sounded like Kieran had only the transient companionship of the trail. "When do you need to leave to meet your drive?" she asked. Kieran glanced at the sun, calculating. "I've got until tomorrow afternoon if the timing is right." "They are not expecting me until the day after tomorrow, actually, so I've got a bit of cushion." "Where will you stay tonight?" The question was out before Dolores quite realized she was going to ask it. Kieran looked at her, surprise flickering across his face, and she felt her cheeks heat again. "I mean, the nearest town is 10 miles from here, and there is a storm building to the west. You can see the clouds forming. If you are caught out in it, you will be miserable. We have got a barn with a dry loft. You would be welcome to sleep there, and I could provide dinner and breakfast in exchange for some work around the property, if you are willing." She was not sure what had possessed her to make the offer. It was not entirely improper, not if he slept in the barn rather than the house. But it was bold in a way that the old Dolores, the one who had existed before Robert's death, would never have been. This new Dolores, the one who had learned to negotiate with cattle buyers and repair fence posts and shoot snakes that threatened her chickens, apparently had fewer qualms about inviting strange cowboys to stay on her property. Kieran considered the offer, and she could see him working through the same calculations she had already made. Finally, he nodded. "That would be very kind, madam, and I would be happy to work for my keep. What needs doing?" Dolores stood, relief and something else, something warmer, flooding through her. "Quite a bit, actually. The fence on the south pasture has several posts that need reinforcing, and there is a section of the barn roof that leaks when it rains. I have been meaning to get to it, but there is always something more urgent." "Consider it done," Kieran said, standing as well. He handed her his empty plate. "That was a fine breakfast, madam, best I have had in weeks. Please call me Dolores," she said. "If you are going to be working here, even just for a day, we do not need to be so formal." He smiled again, that transformation that made him look younger and less careworn. "Dolores it is, then, and you can call me Kieran." He spent the rest of the morning working on the fence, while Dolores returned to her garden, and the dozens of other tasks that filled her days. But she found her attention wandering, her gaze drifting toward the south pasture, where she could see Kieran's figure moving along the fence line, testing posts and hammering in reinforcements where needed. Emma stayed with him for a while, practicing her rope work and chattering away in that manner children had when they found an adult who actually listened to them. At midday, Dolores brought out lunch, cold chicken and bread, and some early tomatoes from the garden. They ate on the porch again, and this time the conversation flowed more easily. Kieran asked about her experiences managing the ranch, and Dolores found herself telling him things she had not voiced to anyone else. The fear that she would not be able to make the next mortgage payment, the frustration of being dismissed by the male cattle buyers who assumed she did not know the value of her own stock, the exhaustion of trying to be both mother and father to Emma while keeping food on the table and the ranch running. "You have done more than most men could do in your situation," Kieran said when she finished. "It takes real strength to keep going when everything is stacked against you." "I do not feel strong most days," Dolores admitted. "Mostly I just feel tired." "Strength and tiredness are not opposites," Kieran said. "In my experience, the strongest people are usually the ones who are most tired, because they are the ones carrying the heaviest loads." Something about the way he said it, the understanding in his eyes, made Dolores's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had been so alone in this struggle, so isolated in her determination to prove she could manage on her own. Having someone acknowledge the difficulty of what she was doing, having someone see her effort even if they could not see the full results, meant more than she would have expected. After lunch, Kieran climbed up onto the barn roof to work on the leak. Dolores told herself she had work to do inside the house, mending that needed finishing and bread that needed baking, but she found herself drawn back to the porch, watching him work. He moved with confidence across the pitched roof, removing damaged shingles and replacing them with new ones from the stack she had purchased months ago, but never gotten around to installing. The storm clouds were building now, towering thunderheads that promised a significant downpour by evening. Dolores could smell the rain on the wind, that distinctive scent of water meeting dry earth. The air had that electric quality that came before big storms, and she saw Kieran glance at the sky periodically, calculating how much time he had left. Emma came running up to the porch around mid-afternoon, her face glowing with excitement. "Mama, I roped the fence post 10 times in a row, 10 times. That is wonderful, sweetheart," Dolores said, pulling her daughter close for a quick hug. Emma smelled of sun and dust and childhood, and Dolores felt a wave of fierce love wash over her. Everything she did, every difficult decision and backbreaking day was for this girl, to give her a future, a foundation, a place to belong. "Can Mr. Kieran stay for dinner?" Emma asked. "Please." "He said he would show me how to make a trick loop if there is time." "He is staying in the barn tonight," Dolores said. "So yes, he will be here for dinner, and breakfast tomorrow, and then he has to leave." "Why does he have to leave?" It was such a simple question, asked with such genuine confusion, and Dolores did not have a good answer for it. "Because he has his own life," she could say. "Because he is just passing through. Because this is not his home and we are not his family." But all of those answers felt inadequate somehow, incomplete. "Because he has a job to get to," Dolores finally said. "He has to meet up with a cattle drive heading north to Kansas." "Could not he do a cattle drive from here?" Emma asked. "We have cattle. We have 20 cattle, sweetheart." "A real cattle drive has hundreds, sometimes thousands. It is different." Emma looked disappointed but accepting. She ran back to the yard to continue practicing, and Dolores sat down in her rocking chair again, her thoughts complicated and tangled. It was ridiculous to feel this sense of regret about a man she had met only that morning, a stranger who had done nothing more than teach her daughter to throw a rope and fix some things around her property. But there it was anyway, a hollow feeling in her chest at the thought of him riding away tomorrow afternoon. Kieran finished with the roof just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. He climbed down the ladder with his tools and jogged to the porch, reaching it just as the sky opened up in earnest. The rain came down in sheets, turning the yard into a temporary lake and filling the air with that beautiful sound of water drumming on wood and earth. "Perfect timing," Kieran said, slightly breathless. He was grinning, his hair plastered to his head and his shirt wet across the shoulders. "That roof should hold now. The leak was worse than I thought, but I patched it good." "Thank you," Dolores said. She stood up, aware that they were standing very close together on the small porch, water pouring off the roof edge just inches away. She could smell him, sweat and leather and something else, something distinctly male that she had almost forgotten. "I have been worried about that leak. Last big rain, it soaked half the hay in the loft." "It should be fine now," Kieran said. His voice had dropped slightly, taken on a different quality, and when Dolores looked up at him, she saw that he was looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment, they just stood there, the rain pouring down around them, something unspoken building in the air between them. Dolores felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the humid air. It had been so long since she had been looked at like this, since she had felt this particular electric awareness of another person. Then Emma came crashing up the porch steps, soaking wet and laughing, and the moment broke. Dolores stepped back, flustered, and busied herself with fussing over Emma. "Good grief, child, you are soaked through. Inside now and change into dry clothes." Emma went, still laughing, and Dolores risked a glance at Kieran. He was looking out at the rain, his expression unreadable, but she thought she saw color on his cheeks that had not been there before. "I should get cleaned up before dinner," he said. "If you point me toward the well, I can wash there." "Use the pump by the barn," Dolores said. "There is soap in a tin nailed to the post, and I will bring you a clean shirt. You are about Robert's size." She went inside before he could protest, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled out one of Robert's old work shirts from the trunk where she had stored his clothes. It was strange, handling his things after all this time, but the sharp edge of grief had dulled to something more manageable. She thought Robert would have approved of Kieran, would have appreciated his skill and his kindness to Emma. She brought the shirt out and left it on the porch railing, not trusting herself to hand it to him directly. Then she went back inside and started preparing dinner, her hands moving automatically through familiar tasks while her mind churned with unfamiliar feelings. What was she doing? She could not afford to develop feelings for a drifting cowboy who would be gone by tomorrow afternoon. She had Emma to think about, and the ranch, and her own hard-won independence. Getting tangled up with a man, even a good man like Kieran seemed to be, would only complicate everything. But when he came to the door an hour later, clean and wearing Robert's shirt that fit him almost perfectly, Dolores felt that flutter in her chest again, that warmth that had nothing to do with the heat of the kitchen. She let him in and served dinner, fried steak and potatoes and green beans from the garden, and they ate together at the small kitchen table, Emma chattering away about everything she had learned that day about ropes and loops and cattle. After dinner, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. Kieran showed Emma the trick loop he had promised, making the rope dance in complicated patterns that had the girl squealing with delight. Then, as the last light faded from the western sky, he said his good nights and headed out to the barn with a lantern and some spare blankets Dolores had provided. That night, lying in her bed with Emma asleep in the small room next door, Dolores found herself unable to sleep. She kept replaying the day in her mind, the sight of Kieran working with Emma, the sound of his laugh, that moment on the porch when they had stood so close together. She had not felt this way in years, and it frightened her as much as it exhilarated her. The rain continued through the night, and when morning came, the world was washed clean and fresh. Dolores woke early, as she always did, and started breakfast. She made extra portions, scrambled eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits with butter and jam. Emma stumbled out of bed just as Dolores was finishing, and together they set the table. Kieran knocked on the door right on time, his hat in his hands and a slight awkwardness in his posture. "Morning," he said. "Something smells good." "Just breakfast," Dolores said, waving him inside. "Nothing fancy." But it felt fancy somehow, felt special, having him sit at the table again. They ate together, the conversation easier now, more comfortable. Emma asked Kieran questions about cattle drives, about the places he had seen and the things he had done, and he answered patiently, painting pictures with his words that had both Dolores and Emma hanging on every syllable. After breakfast, Kieran went back outside to check on his horse and gather his things. Dolores cleaned up the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate, putting off the inevitable moment when he would ride away. Emma had gone outside too, and through the window, Dolores could see her showing Kieran her improved rope skills, eager for his approval. Finally, there was nothing left to delay. Dolores dried her hands on her apron and went outside. Kieran had his horse saddled and was securing his bedroll. Emma stood nearby, her small face sad. "You really have to go?" Emma asked, and Dolores heard the echo of her own thoughts in her daughter's voice. "I am afraid so," Kieran said gently. He knelt down so he was at Emma's eye level. "But you keep practicing with that rope, you hear." Next time I pass through, I want to see you able to catch anything that moves. Next time. Emma's face brightened. You are coming back. Kieran glanced at Dolores, and she saw something complicated cross his face. Well, I do not know exactly when, but the cattle trails run through this area regular. It is possible. He stood and turned to Dolores, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The morning sun was bright, the air clean and fresh after the rain, and Dolores found herself memorizing details without meaning to. The way his hat sat on his head, the particular shade of gray his eyes were in this light, the shape of his hands as he held his horse's reins. Thank you for your hospitality, Kieran said formally, and for the work. It was good to feel useful for a bit, not just drifting. Thank you for helping Emma, Dolores said, and for the repairs. You did more in a day than I could have managed in a week. Another silence, this one heavier, weighted with all the things neither of them was saying. Finally, Kieran cleared his throat. Dolores, I was wondering, would it be all right if I wrote to you, just to see how you and Emma are doing, how the ranch is managing? I do not get to see settled places much, and it would be nice to hear about, if that would not be unwelcome. Dolores felt her heart skip. I would like that, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. We do not get much mail out here, but there is a post office in Fort Worth. You could send letters there, and I check for mail when I go into town for supplies. Then I will write, Kieran said. He smiled, that warm transformation of his features that she had seen several times now. Take care of yourself, Dolores Barrett, and you too, Miss Emma. Keep practicing. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, touched the brim of his hat in farewell, and turned his horse toward the road. Dolores and Emma stood together in the yard, watching him ride away, his figure growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared over a rise in the land. I like him, Mama, Emma said quietly. He was nice. Yes, Dolores agreed, her throat tight. He was. They went back to their regular routine after that, the daily round of chores and responsibilities that kept the ranch running. But something had shifted in Dolores. She found herself thinking about Kieran at odd moments, wondering where he was, whether he was safe, whether he was thinking about them too. She caught herself looking down the road more often than necessary, half expecting to see him riding back, though she knew it was foolish. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Dolores had almost convinced herself that Kieran's promise to write had been nothing more than polite words when she made her monthly trip into Fort Worth for supplies and stopped by the post office on a whim. The postmaster, a grizzled old man named Henderson, grinned when he saw her. Got something for you, Mrs. Barrett, he said, producing a letter from beneath his counter. Come in 2 days ago. Dolores took the letter with hands that trembled slightly. The handwriting on the envelope was bold and clear, and when she opened it, she found 3 pages covered in that same strong script. Dear Dolores and Emma, the letter began. I hope this letter finds you both well and the ranch thriving. I have been thinking about you often since I left, wondering how Emma is progressing with her rope work, and whether that barn roof held up through any more storms. The drive I joined met up in Wichita Falls as planned, and we have been pushing nearly 2,000 head north toward Kansas. It is hard work, long days in the saddle and longer nights standing watch, but there is something satisfying about it too. The other men on the drive are a good bunch, experienced drovers who know their business. We cross through some beautiful country, wide open plains that stretch as far as you can see in every direction. At night, when it is my turn to watch the herd, I look up at the stars and think about that morning on your porch, watching the rain come in. There is a peacefulness to your place that stays with me, a sense of home that I have not felt in a long time. I hope I am not being too forward in saying this, but I wanted you to know that my time at your ranch meant more to me than just a place to spend a night. Meeting you and Emma, seeing what you have built and how you take care of each other, it reminded me that there are good things in this world worth staying in one place for. I would like to come back and visit, if you would be amenable to that. Not right away, as this drive will keep me occupied through the summer, but perhaps in the fall, after we have delivered the herd and I have collected my wages. I could help you prepare the ranch for winter, do some of the heavier work that might be difficult for you to manage alone. But I will understand if that is not something you are interested in. You have made a good life for yourself and Emma, and maybe you do not need or want a drifting cowboy disrupting that. I just wanted you to know that the option is there if you want it. Please write back if you get the chance. I would love to hear how things are going with you both. With warm regards, Kieran Walsh. Dolores read the letter 3 times standing right there in the post office. And by the third reading, she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. She bought paper and a pen from Henderson right there and wrote her reply in the corner of the post office, her words tumbling out almost faster than she could write them. "Dear Kieran," she wrote, "your letter was a wonderful surprise and very welcome. Emma was thrilled to hear from you, and immediately wanted me to tell you that she can now rope the fence post 15 times in a row without missing. She has been practicing every day, sometimes to the point where I have to remind her that there are other chores that need doing too. The ranch is doing well. The barn roof held perfectly through 2 more big storms, and the fence repairs you made are still solid. We had a successful calving season, with all 20 of our cows producing healthy calves. I am hoping to sell 10 of the calves in the fall to help with expenses, and keep the other 10 to build up our herd. It has been a challenging few months, I will not lie. There was a problem with coyotes getting too close to the chicken coop, and I lost 3 hens before I managed to reinforce the fence. And one of our horses threw a shoe and went lame for a week, which set us back on some of the work I had planned. But we are managing, as we always do. I was glad to receive your letter, and gladder still to know that you think of us. I think of you too, more often than I probably should admit. That day you spent here felt like a gift, a reminder that I do not have to do everything alone, that there are still good people in the world willing to help without expecting anything in return. You are welcome to visit in the fall if your plans allow it. More than welcome, actually. Emma asks about you regularly, and I would be lying if I said I was not hoping to see you again. There is certainly plenty of work to be done to prepare for winter, and I would appreciate the help. But even if there were not, I would still want you to come. Please be safe on the trail. I know cattle drives can be dangerous, and I worry about you facing storms and river crossings and all the other hazards I have heard about. Write when you can, and know that your letters will always be welcome. With affection, Dolores Barrett. She sent the letter off and drove home in a daze, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Emma was waiting for her at the gate, eager to help unload the supplies, and Dolores told her about Kieran's letter. Emma's excitement matched her own, and they spent the evening making plans for Kieran's visit in the fall, all the projects they could work on together, all the things Emma wanted to show him. The letters continued through the summer, arriving every 2 or 3 weeks with the irregular timing of mail sent from the trail. Kieran wrote about the drive, the challenges they faced, the landscape they passed through. He wrote about the other drovers, giving Dolores glimpses into a world she had only heard about secondhand. And gradually, carefully, he began to write more personally, sharing his thoughts and feelings, his dreams and regrets. I have been thinking about what I want from my life, he wrote in one letter. I have spent the last 15 years drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, always moving on to the next job. It seemed like freedom when I started, but lately it feels more like running away. From what? I am not entirely sure. Maybe from the possibility of failure, of trying to build something and losing it the way my father lost his homestead. But meeting you has changed something in me. Seeing how you have kept your ranch going despite everything stacked against you, how you have built a life for Emma even when it would have been easier to give up, it has made me wonder if maybe I have been wrong all these years. Maybe staying and building is not a trap. Maybe it is the point. Dolores wrote back with equal honesty, sharing her own fears and doubts. I worry constantly that I am not doing enough for Emma, she wrote. That I am failing her by not being able to provide the kind of life her father would have given her. I worry that one bad season, one stroke of bad luck, will be enough to destroy everything I have worked for. But then I look at Emma, at how strong and capable she is becoming, and I think maybe I am doing something right after all. Your letters have meant more to me than I can easily express. It is such a comfort to have someone to share my thoughts with, someone who understands the challenges of this life. I find myself looking forward to your letters the way I used to look forward to Christmas as a child, with that same sense of anticipation and joy. By late summer, the tone of their correspondence had shifted from friendly to something deeper, more intimate. They were courting, Dolores realized, even though they were separated by hundreds of miles. They were learning each other through words on paper, building a connection that felt real and substantial despite the distance. In August, Kieran's letters stopped coming. 1 week passed, then 2, then 3. Dolores tried not to worry, telling herself that mail was unreliable, that the drive might have taken them somewhere remote where posting letters was impossible. But as the days stretched into a month with no word, fear began to gnaw at her. What if something had happened to him? What if he had been hurt, or worse? She made extra trips into Fort Worth, checking the post office obsessively. Henderson started to give her sympathetic looks that made her want to cry. Emma noticed her mother's distress and grew quieter, more subdued. Then, in early September, when Dolores had almost given up hope, Henderson greeted her with a huge smile and a letter that looked thicker than usual. Dolores tore it open right there, her hands shaking. "Dearest Dolores," the letter began, "I am sorry for the long silence. I will explain everything, but first I need to tell you the most important part. I am coming to see you. I should arrive at your ranch in approximately 2 weeks, around the 20th of September. I hope that timing works for you because I have much to discuss, and I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." The drive ended successfully in Abilene at the end of July. We delivered the herd, and I collected my wages. I had planned to write to you immediately and then make my way back down to Texas. But then I received an offer that I needed to consider carefully. The trail boss, a man named Davies, who I have worked with on several previous drives, is getting too old for the trail. He wants to retire, and he offered to sell me his operation. It is not a huge outfit, but it is profitable and well established, with contracts for several drives each year. It would mean buying his holding pens outside of Abilene, his chuck wagon and equipment, and taking over his business relationships with various Texas ranchers. I spent the last month thinking about this offer, working through the finances, and ultimately securing a loan to make the purchase. The reason I did not write was because I did not want to tell you about this possibility until I knew for certain it would happen. I did not want to raise hopes or expectations, especially about what this might mean for us. Because here is the thing, Dolores. If I take over this business, I will need a home base. Somewhere to spend the off-season, somewhere to plan and prepare for the drives, somewhere to return to between jobs. And I have been thinking that Fort Worth would be an ideal location for such a base. It is well positioned along the cattle trails, has good rail connections, and is a growing town with opportunity. I am not asking you to make any promises or commitments yet, but I wanted you to know that I am not just coming for a visit. I am coming with the intention of staying in the area, of building a life here, and I am hoping, if you are willing, that you might be part of that life. I will understand if this is too much, too fast. We have known each other only one day in person, though it feels like longer through our letters. But I know my own heart, and my heart is telling me that what I feel for you is real and worth pursuing. See you soon. I am counting the days. Yours, Kieran. Dolores read the letter twice, then a third time, her eyes filling with tears that she did not even try to hold back. Henderson, watching from behind his counter, grinned. Good news, I take it? Yes, Dolores managed. Very good news. She drove home in a state of euphoria and terror mixed together. Kieran was coming back. He was moving to the area. He wanted to build a life that included her and Emma. It was everything she had been hoping for and afraid to hope for all at once. Emma was ecstatic when she heard the news, and the 2 weeks before Kieran's arrival passed in a flurry of preparation. Dolores cleaned the house from top to bottom, even though Kieran would be staying in the barn as before. She worked extra hard on the garden, wanting it to look its best. She even made herself a new dress, something she had not done in years, using fabric she had been saving for a special occasion. On the 20th of September, a clear, beautiful fall day with just a hint of coolness in the air, Dolores found herself pacing the porch like a nervous girl. Emma had stationed herself at the gate, watching the road, and Dolores heard her shout long before she saw the rider approaching. He is coming. Mama, he is coming. Dolores forced herself to walk, not run, down the porch steps. Her heart was hammering, her palms sweating, and she felt simultaneously foolish and thrilled. What if the reality did not match the feeling they had built through letters? What if seeing each other again shattered the connection they had forged? But then Kieran was dismounting at the gate, and Emma was running to him, and he was laughing and scooping her up in a hug, and Dolores felt all her fears dissolve. This was right. This was real. Kieran set Emma down and walked toward Dolores, his gray eyes locked on hers. He looked thinner than she remembered, more weathered by his months on the trail, but his smile was the same, warm and genuine. He stopped a few feet away, suddenly hesitant. Hello, Dolores. Hello, Kieran. They stood there for a moment, the distance between them feeling vast and insignificant all at once. Then Kieran closed the gap in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, and Dolores went willingly, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder, his arms strong and sure around her. She breathed in the smell of him, dust and leather and horses, and underneath it all, something uniquely him. I missed you, Kieran murmured against her hair. I know that sounds foolish, missing someone I barely know, but I did. Every day. I missed you too, Dolores said, her voice muffled against his shirt. So much. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, until Emma's voice broke through. Are you going to kiss her? In the stories, this is when there is kissing. Kieran laughed and pulled back slightly, looking down at Dolores with a question in his eyes. She nodded, just barely, and he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then it deepened, became more certain, and Dolores felt the world tilt and settle into a new configuration, one where this man was part of her life in a fundamental way. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Emma was grinning from ear to ear. That was better than in the stories, she declared. The rest of the day passed in a blur of conversation and catching up. Kieran told them about the drive, about purchasing the business, about his plans for the future. He had secured a small property on the outskirts of Fort Worth. He explained, with enough land for holding pens and storage but close enough to town to be practical. He would need to hire some men, get his equipment in order, and start making connections with ranchers for next season's drives. "But all of that can wait," he said as they sat on the porch in the evening, Emma having finally gone to bed after refusing to leave Kieran's side all day. "Right now, I just want to be here with you." Dolores took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I am glad you are here. I was afraid you might change your mind, that you would decide this was all too complicated." "Never," Kieran said firmly. "Dolores, I need you to understand something. I have been alone for a long time by choice because I was afraid of exactly this. Of caring about someone enough that losing them would destroy me. But then I met you, and I realized that being alone was not protecting me from pain. It was just guaranteeing that I would never feel anything good either." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know we have not known each other long in person. I know there are practical concerns, questions about how we would make this work. But I also know that what I feel for you is real. I love you, Dolores. I think I started falling in love with you that first day, watching you stand up straight and strong even though I could see how tired you were. And every letter just made me more certain." Dolores felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again, did not think I could. Robert was a good man and I loved him, but this feels different. Like I am meeting someone who sees me for who I am now, not who I was before." Kieran kissed her again, slower this time, more thorough. When they finally separated, he said, "I want to marry you, Dolores. I want to be Emma's father, not replacing Robert but being there for her as she grows up. I want to combine your ranch with my business, make something strong and lasting that we build together. But I also want to do this right, want to give you time to be sure, want to court you properly. How long did you have in mind?" Dolores asked, trying to keep her voice light even though her heart was racing. "I was thinking the spring," Kieran said. "That gives us the fall and winter to really get to know each other, to work through the practical details, to make sure Emma is comfortable with all of this. And then, if you are still willing, we could marry in the spring and I could move my operations here to your ranch. We would have more land that way, more resources to build something substantial." "The spring sounds perfect," Dolores said. And then, because she could not resist, "But that is a long time to wait," Kieran grinned. "I am aware, but I want to do this right. You deserve to be courted, to be wooed, to have time to be absolutely sure this is what you want. Besides," he added, his grin turning mischievous, "anticipation makes everything sweeter." They spent the next several weeks in a state of happiness that Dolores had thought she would never experience again. Kieran stayed in the barn, maintaining propriety, but spent his days working on the ranch and his evenings on the porch with Dolores, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when Emma was not looking. He worked on winter preparations, repairing equipment and reinforcing buildings, and helping Dolores plan for the cold months ahead. He also spent considerable time with Emma, not just teaching her more about rope work but also reading to her, helping her with the arithmetic Dolores had been teaching her, and simply being present in a way the girl had not experienced since her father's death. Dolores watched them together and felt her love for Kieran deepen. He did not just tolerate Emma as a necessary part of being with Dolores. He genuinely cared for the girl, enjoyed her company, took pride in her accomplishments. In October, Kieran took Dolores into Fort Worth and bought her a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. He proposed formally on the porch, with Emma as their witness, and Dolores said yes through happy tears. Emma insisted on being involved in the wedding planning immediately, full of ideas about flowers and dresses and cake. The months passed quickly. Kieran divided his time between his own property, where he was setting up his business, and Dolores's ranch, where he continued to help with the work and court Dolores in earnest. He brought her flowers picked from the prairie, wrote her notes that he left hidden around the house for her to find, took her on long walks in the evenings when the work was done, and Emma was asleep. They talked about everything, their pasts and their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. Dolores told him about her marriage to Robert, about the good years and the hard ones, about the grief of losing him and the terror of being left alone. Kieran told her about his childhood, about watching his father lose everything and vowing never to be tied down the way his father had been, about realizing only recently that freedom and loneliness were not the same thing. "I used to think happiness meant having no responsibilities," Kieran said one night in November as they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the chill. "No one depending on me, no obligations, just the freedom to go where I wanted when I wanted. But now I realize that was not happiness. It was just avoiding unhappiness, which is not the same thing at all." "What is happiness, then?" Dolores asked, snuggling closer to him. "This," Kieran said simply. "Sitting here with you, knowing Emma is safe asleep inside, having work to do tomorrow that matters. Having people to care for and people who care for me. Having a future to plan for instead of just the next job. That is happiness." The winter was mild by Texas standards, though they still had a few hard freezes and one ice storm that kept them all housebound for 3 days. Kieran stayed in the house during the storm, sleeping on the floor by the fire while Dolores and Emma took the beds, and it gave them all a taste of what it would be like to be a family. Emma loved it, loved having Kieran there for meals and evenings, loved the way he played games with her and told her stories about his adventures on the cattle trails. As spring approached, the wedding plans became more concrete. They decided on a simple ceremony in Fort Worth, at the small church Dolores occasionally attended. They would invite the few friends and neighbors Dolores had, and Kieran would bring some of his fellow drovers who had become his closest friends. After the wedding, Kieran would officially move to the ranch, and they would combine their resources to build something larger and more prosperous than either could manage alone. "Are you nervous?" Emma asked Dolores the night before the wedding. They were in Dolores's room, Emma helping her mother prepare her wedding dress, a new one this time, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs. "A little," Dolores admitted. "Not because I am unsure about marrying Kieran, but because I want everything to be perfect. I want this new beginning to start right. It will be perfect," Emma said with the confidence of childhood. "Kieran loves you and you love him and I love both of you. That is all that matters." Dolores hugged her daughter, overwhelmed with emotion. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from you," Emma said simply. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, one of those perfect spring days that felt like a gift. Dolores wore her blue dress and carried wildflowers that Kieran had picked for her. Emma wore a new dress too, yellow with matching ribbons in her braided hair, and served as the only attendant. Kieran wore his best clothes, his face clean-shaven and his hair neatly trimmed. And when Dolores walked into the church and saw him waiting at the altar, her breath caught at how handsome he looked. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged vows in front of their small gathering of friends, promising to love and honor each other, to build a life together, to face whatever came as partners. When the preacher said Kieran could kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that made Dolores's eyes fill with tears. The celebration afterward was held at a local restaurant that had closed to the public for their party. There was food and music and dancing, and Dolores felt lighter than she had in years, watching Kieran dance with Emma, seeing him laugh with his friends, being introduced as his wife. The word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. Wife. She was a wife again, but this time it felt different, felt like a choice she had made freely rather than something that had simply happened to her. As evening fell, they said their goodbyes and drove back to the ranch, Emma falling asleep in the back of the wagon. Kieran carried her inside and up to her bed while Dolores lit lamps throughout the house. Their house now. Theirs together. When Kieran came back downstairs, Dolores was waiting for him in the main room. They had agreed that Emma would keep her small bedroom, but they had spent the past week fixing up the larger bedroom, the one that had been Dolores and Robert's, making it fresh and new. A place for new memories, not just old ones. "Hello, wife," Kieran said softly, crossing the room to take her hands. "Hello, husband," Dolores replied, the word sending a thrill through her. He kissed her gently, then more deeply, and led her up the stairs to their room. And for the first time since Robert's death, Dolores did not feel like she was betraying a memory or replacing something lost. She felt like she was beginning something new, something entirely her own. The months that followed their wedding were busy and productive. Kieran officially combined his driving business with the ranch, using their land for holding pens when he brought cattle through. He hired 2 regular hands to help with the work, men he had worked with before and trusted. The ranch began to prosper in ways Dolores had not thought possible when she was managing alone, but the prosperity was not just financial. The house felt alive again, filled with voices and laughter and life. Kieran and Emma developed their own relationship, separate from his relationship with Dolores, and she loved watching them together. He taught Emma to ride better, to work cattle, to shoot, all the skills she would need to eventually run the ranch herself someday if she chose. But he also taught her softer things, like how to appreciate the beauty of a sunset, how to find joy in simple moments, how to be both strong and kind. In the fall of 1874, Dolores discovered she was pregnant. She had thought herself too old at 29, had assumed those childbearing years were behind her, but the doctor confirmed it. She was nervous about telling Kieran, worried he might feel trapped or burdened, but when she finally worked up the courage to share the news, his reaction was pure joy. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Dolores, that is incredible. Are you happy about it?" "I am," Dolores said, realizing it was true. "I was worried at first, but yes, I am happy." Emma was thrilled at the prospect of being a big sister, and the winter was spent preparing for the new arrival. Kieran built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving flowers into the headboard. Dolores sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Emma practiced being helpful and gentle, preparing herself for her new role. The baby arrived in early May of 1875. A healthy boy with Kieran's gray eyes and a loud voice that suggested he would have no trouble making his presence known. They named him Thomas Robert Walsh, honoring both Kieran's father and Dolores's first husband, and from the moment Emma first held him, she was utterly devoted to her baby brother. Kieran was a natural father, patient and loving and present in a way that made Dolores fall even more deeply in love with him. He would walk the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, singing old trail songs in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. He changed diapers and gave baths and took his turn with nighttime feedings, never complaining about the loss of sleep. "This is what I was avoiding all those years," he said one night as they lay in bed, Thomas finally asleep in his cradle between them and Emma sleeping peacefully in her own room. "I thought tying myself down would mean losing my freedom, losing myself. But it turns out I did not really know who I was until I had all of you to care for. We are lucky to have you, Dolores said, reaching across the cradle to take his hand. I am lucky to have you. The years rolled on, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. The ranch continued to prosper, growing to 200 head of cattle and expanding their land holdings when a neighboring property went up for sale. Kieran's driving business thrived, and he developed a reputation as an honest dealer who treated his men fairly and delivered his herds in good condition. Emma grew into a capable young woman, as skilled with a rope and horse as any boy her age, but also kind and thoughtful and determined to make her own mark on the world. Thomas turned out to be quieter than his sister, more contemplative, but with his own brand of stubborn determination when he set his mind to something. In 1878, Dolores gave birth to a daughter, Catherine Marie, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. Emma, now 13, helped care for the baby with the same devotion she had shown Thomas, and Kieran was once again amazed by the experience of bringing new life into the world. 3 children, he said, holding Catherine and watching Emma help Thomas with his letters at the kitchen table. I went from having no family to having all of this. How did I get so lucky? We are the lucky ones, Dolores said, leaning against him. You chose us, and you stayed, and you built this life with me. That took courage and commitment, and I am grateful every single day. Fort Worth continued to grow and change around them. The railroad came through in 1876, transforming the town from a rough frontier settlement to a proper cattle town with rail connections to the east. Kieran adapted his business to take advantage of the new opportunities, and they began sending their own cattle to market by rail rather than relying solely on the traditional drives north. They faced hardships too, of course. There was a drought in 1880 that tested everyone, a year when rain was scarce, and they had to make difficult decisions about their herd. There was the winter of 1882, when Emma fell seriously ill with influenza, and they spent 3 terrifying weeks nursing her back to health. There was the economic panic of 1883 that made selling cattle difficult and money tight for several months. But they weathered each challenge together, as partners, and each difficulty overcome seemed to strengthen rather than weaken their bond. Dolores would look at Kieran across the dinner table, watch him joke with the children or discuss plans for the ranch, and feel overwhelming gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought him to her gate that spring morning years ago. Emma eventually married, in 1886, a young man named Daniel Carter who worked as a horse trainer and had the patience and quiet strength that suited Emma's more fiery nature. They built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, staying close to family while establishing their own independence. Emma continued to help run the ranch, working alongside her stepfather with the cattle and horses, and Dolores was proud to see her daughter becoming a true partner in the family business. Thomas showed an aptitude for numbers and business that Kieran recognized and encouraged. As the boy grew into a young man, Kieran began teaching him the financial side of the cattle business, how to negotiate deals and manage accounts and plan for the future. Thomas proved to have a shrewd head for business combined with his father's integrity, and Kieran often said he was grooming his son to eventually take over the operation entirely. Catherine, the youngest, turned out to have her mother's love of growing things and spent hours in the expanded gardens Dolores had developed over the years. But she also had a fierce, independent streak that manifested when she insisted on learning to read law books that Kieran brought home from town, declaring at the age of 12 that she wanted to be a lawyer when she grew up. In 1890, such ambitions were unusual for a girl, But Kieran and Dolores encouraged her, believing that the world was changing and their daughter should have every opportunity to pursue her dreams. By 1892, nearly 20 years after that first meeting, Dolores and Kieran found themselves sitting on the same porch where it had all begun, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. Emma's children, their grandchildren, were playing in the yard under Thomas's watchful eye while Catherine read on the porch steps, absorbed in one of her law books. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Dolores asked, leaning her head on Kieran's shoulder. They were both in their late 40s now, his hair showing silver at the temples and her face marked with lines that spoke of years of sun and laughter. "If you had not stopped that day, if you had just ridden past, all the time," Kieran admitted. "And then I thank God that I stopped. That I listened to whatever instinct made me offer to help Emma with her rope. That you were brave enough to take a chance on a drifting cowboy with nothing but good intentions and a horse. You had more than that," Dolores said. "You had a good heart and kindness and the courage to want something different than what you had known. Those things mattered more than money or property or any material thing." Kieran kissed the top of her head. "I fell in love with you standing right here on this porch, you know. Watching you watch us, seeing the strength in you, the determination. The way you protected your daughter but were still willing to accept help when it was offered honestly. I knew then that you were someone special, someone worth changing my entire life for." "I fell in love with you teaching Emma," Dolores confessed. "Seeing your patience, your genuine joy in her success, the way you looked at us like we mattered, like we were worth your time and attention. I had been so alone, and suddenly I felt seen again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their family around them, the laughter of children and the low murmur of conversation. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and well-maintained, the result of years of hard work and dedication. The house behind them was filled with love and life, with memories built and futures being planned. "You have any regrets?" Kieran asked quietly. Dolores considered the question seriously. There had been hard times, certainly, moments of doubt and fear and exhaustion. But looking back over the nearly 2 decades since Kieran had ridden into her life, she could not identify anything she would change. Every challenge had led to growth, every difficulty had been overcome together, and the life they had built was richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined in those dark days after Robert's death. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one. You." "Only that I did not meet you sooner," Kieran said, pulling her closer. "But then, maybe we both needed to become who we were before we could appreciate what we found in each other. You needed to discover your own strength, and I needed to learn that having roots did not mean losing myself." "We were exactly who we needed to be," Dolores agreed. "And we found each other at exactly the right time." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Emma came up onto the porch with her youngest child, a toddler named Sarah, who immediately climbed into Kieran's lap. Thomas followed with Catherine, and they all settled onto the porch, 3 generations of family together in the place where it had all begun. "Tell us the story again," Sarah demanded in that imperious way of toddlers. "About how Grandpa taught Mama to rope." Kieran laughed. "You have heard that story 100 times. But I like it," Sarah insisted. "Please." So Kieran told the story again, with Dolores and Emma adding their own details and perspectives. He told about riding up to the gate and seeing a little girl struggling with a rope that was too big for her. About a widow who stood straight and proud on her porch, suspicious but willing to take a chance. About teaching Emma to throw a perfect loop and being invited to stay for a meal. "And then Grandpa fixed the barn roof," Emma added, picking up the story. and the fence posts in the south pasture. And Grandma made him the best breakfast I had ever seen. And I fell in love, Kieran said, looking at Dolores with eyes that still held all the warmth and affection of that first day. Right here on this porch, watching your grandmother watch us, I fell completely and utterly in love. And Grandma fell in love too, Sarah said confidently, as though she had been there to witness it. She did, Dolores confirmed, reaching over to ruffle her granddaughter's hair. I fell in love with a cowboy who had the kindness to teach my daughter something I could not teach her myself, and the courage to stay even though staying was harder than leaving would have been. And they lived happily ever after, Sarah concluded, satisfied with the story's ending as always. We did, Kieran said, and Dolores heard the wonder in his voice, the gratitude for this life they had built together. We absolutely did. As the evening deepened, and the family gradually dispersed, children being taken to bed and Thomas heading back to his own house on the property, Dolores and Kieran remained on the porch. It was their favorite time of day, these quiet moments together when the work was done and they could simply be with each other. 20 years, Dolores said softly. It has gone so fast. And so slow, Kieran said. I remember every moment every day. The first time I made you laugh, really laugh. The first time Emma called me Papa instead of Mr. Kieran. Holding Thomas when he was born and realizing I was responsible for this tiny person. Watching you with Catherine, passing on your strength and determination. Every moment has been precious. We have been blessed, Dolores said. More than I ever thought possible. This life, this family, this love. It is more than I dreamed of in those lonely years after Robert died. You built this, Kieran said firmly. You kept this ranch running when anyone else would have given up. You raised Emma to be strong and capable. You took a chance on me when you had every reason to protect yourself and stay closed off. This life we have, it exists because of your courage and your strength. Our courage, Dolores corrected. Our strength. You chose to stay, to build, to commit. You could have drifted on after that first visit, could have decided we were not worth the complications. But you stayed, and you became the foundation this family is built on. They rocked in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the ranch settling around them. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. An owl called from the barn. The wind rustled through the cottonwood trees Kieran had planted in their first year together, now grown tall and strong. I have been thinking, Kieran said eventually. Thomas is ready to take over more of the business side, and Emma essentially runs the cattle operation already. Maybe it is time for us to step back a bit, take some time to do things we have always talked about but never had time for. Like what? Dolores asked, intrigued. Like taking a real trip, not just to town or to visit the cattle markets. We could go to California, see the ocean, or up to Colorado, see the mountains. We have spent 20 years building this place. Maybe it is time to trust our children to run it for a while and give ourselves the gift of time together, just the two of us. Dolores felt a spark of excitement at the idea. They had never had a honeymoon, had gone straight from their wedding to the hard work of building their combined operation. The thought of weeks with just Kieran, exploring new places and making new memories, was appealing. I think I would like that, she said. Let us talk to the children, make sure they are comfortable with it. But yes, I think we have earned some time to ourselves. Good, Kieran said, satisfaction in his voice. Because I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, Dolores Walsh. We have built something amazing together, but I also want you to know that you are enough, just you, without the ranch or the children or any of it. You are the center of everything for me. Dolores turned to look at him, this man who had transformed her life so completely. His hair was more silver than gold now, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. More than that, he was her partner, her love, her home. "I love you," she said simply. "More now than even that first day, and I loved you so much then. Every year, every day, you show me new reasons to love you, the way you are with our children and grandchildren. The way you still surprise me with wildflowers picked on your morning rides. The way you hold me at night like I am the most precious thing in the world. I love all of you, Kieran Walsh." He kissed her then, tender and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, he was smiling. "We did pretty good, did we not? A drifting cowboy and a struggling widow. We took a chance, and look what we built." "The best life I could imagine," Dolores agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still, more memories to make, more adventures to have." "Together," Kieran said firmly. "Always together," Dolores confirmed. They sat on the porch until the stars filled the sky, talking quietly about their plans for the future, reminiscing about the past, simply enjoying each other's presence. Eventually, the evening chill drove them inside, and they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, arms around each other, still as in love as they had been that first spring. In the years that followed, they did take that trip to California, marveling at the ocean and the redwood forests. They visited Colorado and saw the mountains. They traveled to St. Louis and saw the growing modern city with its electric lights and elevated trains. But they always returned home to Fort Worth, to their ranch, to the family they had built together. They lived to see their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They watched Fort Worth transform from a rough cattle town to a proper city. They adapted to changing times, adding modern conveniences to the ranch while maintaining its essential character. And through all of it, they remained partners, lovers, best friends. When people in town talked about the Walsh Ranch, they always mentioned how it had started, the romantic story of the widow and the cowboy. How he had stopped to teach her daughter to throw a rope, how she had watched from the porch and fallen in love, how he had stayed and built a life with her that became the stuff of local legend. But for Dolores and Kieran, it was never a legend or a story. It was simply their life, the greatest adventure either of them had ever taken. It was the choice to take a chance, to trust, to build something together. It was 20 years, and then 30, and then 40 of waking up beside each other, working side by side, facing challenges and celebrating victories as partners in every sense of the word. It was love, pure and simple, the kind that lasted because it was built on friendship and respect as much as passion. The kind that grew deeper with every passing year, every shared experience, every moment of choosing each other over and over again. And when they were very old, sitting on that same porch where it had all begun, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard where Emma had once struggled with an oversized rope, they would hold hands and marvel at the gift they had been given. The gift of finding each other against all odds, of building a life that exceeded anything either had imagined, of loving and being loved in return with a constancy that never wavered. "Still no regrets?" Kieran would ask, his voice thin with age but his eyes still bright when they looked at her. "Not a single one," Dolores would always reply. "You. Only that I have got one lifetime with you instead of infinite lifetimes," Kieran would say. "But I will take what I can get and be grateful for every moment." And they would sit together as the sun set, as it had set thousands of times before, content in the knowledge that they had lived well, loved deeply, and built something that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch would pass to their children, and then their grandchildren, but more importantly, the love they had shared would ripple out through generations. An example of what was possible when two people chose courage over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. It had started with a rope lesson and a porch vigil, with a cowboy's kindness and a widow's willingness to trust. But it had become something far greater, a love story for the ages, as vast and enduring as the Texas sky that stretched above them, as constant as the stars that guided them home to each other, night after night, year after year, for the rest of their long and happy lives together.